And welcome all you Star Trek and Orville fans to the latest episode of the Union Federation here on the Fandom Podcast Network and the BQN, where of course we discuss everything that's happening with Star Trek and the Orville. Now, it's going to be a little bit of a weird episode today. Apparently, we missed the transporter beam before the ion storm came, and so most of the crew got up. However, I am joined here on the planet. We are surrounded by some light beings. It's kind of cool. They're protecting us. By our returning favorite science officer, finally out of sick bay, or at least on a temporary furlough from sick bay, Miss Hayley Stoddart.
Hello. Yes. I'm really glad the energy beings are helping. And it's very nice that Dr. Mboye has let me kind of be on temporary leave, but I do have to have weekly check-ins with Nurse Chapel. So
Yeah. What is life like in the transporter buffer?
it's really interesting. I feel things, but I don't feel things, and I'm not aware. So it's like really out of the loop. So I kind of come back out and I remember some stuff, but some things are just not there.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. So, and of course, we are running a little short on crew this week. Kevin is still in his wedded bliss. So he will be back. We are hoping next week. And of course, he will definitely be back because he is taking over the captain's chair when our Orville coverage starts, which, Haley, we're not that far away from June 2nd. Finally.
Oh man, geez Louise. Yeah, no, it's exciting. I'm super excited about it. I know we were on Hulu and I was just scrolling through stuff and I noticed that they had updated the title and whatnot. So I'm like, oh man, it's coming.
My only problem is I haven't found my new left leg yet. It's kind of
that would be an issue. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I got a couple of weeks yet, so we're all good there. But no, and then of course Miss Nelson is obviously just party for her birthday too hard over the weekend. She's in recovery mode. I warned her about the Romulan ale, Haley.
That'll get you every time.
Yeah,
every time. Yeah,
you're not getting younger. You're getting, more and more wisdom. But with wisdom, there comes a price, and you can't handle your Romulan ale as well.
It's very, very true. Yes.
So, but we are here to talk all things Star Trek Strange New Worlds. We are excited. I have absolutely loved this show since the start of it. But Haley, you have been in kind of the med bay while Strange New Worlds premiered, and you more than any of us were all in for Strange New Worlds. So we don't have really much in the way of Trek news right now, but Haley, I want to give you the floor to let you talk about what you've experienced so far, since I know you've watched the episodes. So I want to get your thoughts on Strange New Worlds, and I know the listeners are very excited to hear your thoughts, especially on a certain captain. I'm just saying.
Yes. Yeah. So I did watch the episodes. I watched the first episode. That was my initial week in sick bay for sure. And so you have to pardon me that I only watched it the one time and I was half loopy when I did. So, but however, I do have to say that I am thoroughly enjoying this back to episodic television in Star Trek. And we do have this wonderful backstory that's going to kind of continue about Pike knowing his fate, which is interesting, to say the least. But I am so excited that we're back to different things going on each week so far in these 3 episodes. I was intrigued right from the get-go, with Pike being gone and obviously the ship's back in, dock and getting fixed and everything. And so it was so fun to see him like riding a horse through the snow. Although I'm gotta say, having been on a horse when I was younger, because we had a horse, to be able to ride in the snow, that's some guts, because it's not easy.
Well, he did get a lot of horse riding in on Hell on Wheels too. So
yes,
he has experience.
True. So I never rode our horse through snow, but I definitely rode our horse in mud, and that's probably just as bad as snow, as thick as that snow was. I'm really enjoying all of the crew. I think the characters are spot on. I like these somewhat younger versions of Uhura and some of our characters, and it's the uniforms are fantastic.
I agree with you there.
Yeah,
They really nailed the classic look, but giving it a little bit of a modern feel as well.
definitely. And I like that they didn't go too crazy with hemlines, just because in Discovery we have the weird hemlines I am just not a fan of. And so I like that while it's an updated look for 2022, it is still very plausible that, these were their uniforms and they look ish similar to what we saw in the original series, and what the show would have been if we'd had Pike as captain instead of Kirk and crew. So that's wonderful. I do, however, the bridge is a little too shiny, and I know that's just a small thing. Um, Given, this is coming off of Discovery and us seeing them in Discovery and Picard and everything. And so I totally get that. But they could have toned down the shininess just a little bit and brightened it up a little bit. Again, I know that's been something we've talked about on Discovery, how it's just a little too dark. And so, but I can handle it. That's totally fine. I will have to say I love the opening credits. I think out of all the new Trek we've had, my favorite, hands down. I will never skip the intro on this one. And I have to say, I've skipped the intro on Discovery. I skipped the intro on Picard. I will never skip the intro on this one. I love the theme song. I love the visuals in the opening credits. There's a Thermion in there. There's the little bit of the bells, which calls back to the original series in it. I love the dialogue coming back into it as well. I think it's fantastic. And I love the look of the ship on the outside. I think one of my favorite things in the opening credits is they go in and zoom in on the front part of the nacelle, the red part of the nacelle, which is such a callback to the original series too. And it's so fantastic. And so I love that. I love it. I want to find the theme song and just have it maybe as a ringtone or something. I don't know. Yeah, super fantastic. I think the only character so far that I'm not crazy about is, and I can't remember her name. So I'm gonna look, is Lon. She's a little gruff and a little chip on her shoulder, aggressive, harsh, which I get based off of, what she's talked about in this recent episode. Being related to Union Khan, I can only imagine the kind of stuff that she went through, but to continue to carry a chip on her shoulder. So I'm hoping that she kind of softens a little bit as the series progresses. But I'm really enjoying it so far. The other thing, their shoes. In this last episode, we kind of saw their shoes a little bit more, and they're just a little pointy, which is a little weird.
Yeah, I can see that. Now, one of the questions we wanted to ask you, because you are our big expert on the original series, do you feel like this so far is capturing that original series spirit?
I do. I really do. Again, this is bridging that gap, at least for me so far, between the cage, which when we watched the original series, that's what we started with. We started with the cage. I know most people don't. And it's bridging that gap and filling in that space when Pike and company were the crew of the Enterprise before we get Kirk and company. And so I think, especially where this is episodic and it feels different and it's exploration and it's getting out there and it's encountering new things, very much, I feel like this is very much in the spirit of the original series so far.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you this then too, because there's been a few standout moments for me. Obviously, one of my favorite moments was the speech that Pike gives at the end of the first episode. And Anson Mount just delivered that so wonderfully. In episode 2, one of my favorite moments is when they're on that asteroid, when Uhura and Spock and Sam Kirk are on the asteroid, and just the visual of that with all the lights and everything like that. Those are just two of my standout moments. Has there been any moments so far out of the first 2 episodes that really stood out for you?
So far, so it's weird because I'm not crazy about kind of in the first episode we get this callback to Discovery and what took place in Discovery with Kirk, with our crew so far, with Captain Pike and Spock and things like that, and I wasn't crazy about that. But then on the flip side, I really loved seeing that Pike is struggling.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to go back out there. And, he's grown the big giant bushy beard. And, he's just not sure if he's that captain material to avoid this future fate. And I like that we're kind of seeing this still be a reoccurring thing so far, 3 episodes in. It's not taking over everything, but it's there. And I like that because, again, so much of Trek has avoided this. The next episode, everything hunky-dory and fine, and I always found that really kind of irritating. And so that's really nice to see that he's still kind of grappling with this. I like Uhura so far, this cadet Uhura, and her not knowing if she wants to be in Starfleet. And getting to know herself by getting to know the crew. There hasn't been like anything that's really, really stood out just because everything's just so great so far. It's just phenomenal. All so wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, I
the
think
sets
for
are
me,
amazing, though. I do have to say, I like the engineering set. Seeing the
engineering set, especially in the episode we're about to talk about.
Wow, that is so cool, and I like that.
Yeah, no, I especially looked amazing in this 3rd episode, which we're going to talk about here shortly. But I think for me, one of the things that I do like, you talk about it being episodic, which I love, but I like the fact, like you said, there's certain little nuggets and tidbits that do carry over, but it's not this like a Discovery or Picard where you have this overarching storyline that's just absorbing everything, and the fact that we're getting the crew, and I think that's just so important that the crew right now, every episode is kind of putting the focus on 1 or 2 members of the crew, so they're getting the moment. But even then, the other members of the crew get a moment to shine. Like I loved in episode 2 the dinner at Pike at the captain's table. I just thought that way they handled that was good. I love Hemmer. I think he's great. And I love the fact that the actor is actually blind in real life, which just makes it that much more special. So yeah, I think it's hitting on all the right notes, at least right out of the gate. And I'm just, it really has for me, Kaylee, brought back my energy to want to watch Star Trek.
Yeah. Well, I look at it this way. If you pick up a book series, let's say, there's a book series that I totally obsessed with, and there's like over 50 books. But what this is the stories are different. So each book is a different story, but the characters progress. And so that's what this is so far with Strange New Worlds is we're getting character growth and character progression. And so yes, character-wise things are going to carry over, but then each episode is its own little book. And so what's going on has really no bearing on the previous stuff story-wise, except for what happens with our characters. And I really like that. I really enjoy that because if we look back at the original series, that's what that was. Unless you had a 2-parter episode, and same with TNG, unless there was a 2-part episode, you really didn't have carryover except for character development. And I like that. These overarching stories, if they're done well, they really do work. You look at Deep Space Nine, it was 7 seasons of this big, giant, long, story. And there was character growth and all that kind of stuff. But I think so much of it just isn't, it's done so fast that it really can't get fleshed out. And so it's nice to finally have something that's just episodic in Trek again.
Yeah,
and I have to say, Nurse Chapel, I love this actress. I think she's doing phenomenal. Her character is just so fun.
There might be a little bit of crushing on Nurse Chapel. I'm just saying.
I think that's totally fine. I think there was a lot of crushing on Nurse Chapel in the original series, so you're fine.
Yeah, there we go. I got to get some Vulcaneers. That's apparently how you get her attention, though. So
Maybe. Who knows?
yeah. So, well, speaking of episodes, it's time to activate up the quantum drive so we can talk about the topic of this week's episode of Union Federation, episode 128, and it is, of course, covering Strange New Worlds, episode 3, Ghosts of Illyria. So let's fire up that quantum drive. Now, of course, before we transmit our mission from here on the planet, if we can get through the ion storm, that's the big question.
Yes.
I've got to do the proper thing for our listeners. That alert means one thing. We are going into spoiler territory. We're going to be talking about all the interesting things that happened in this episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. So if you haven't watched the episode yet, go watch it. Come back. Join us. We're going to have a fun look at this episode. And, you know, I might turn up the lights a little bit. I'm just saying that you got plenty of light behind you, Hayley, if you're seeing this on the YouTube channel. So first of all, the most important thing before we start anything, is your hair in the proper place, Hayley?
I think so.
Okay, so if your hair is good, I'm going to ask you to give the latest edition of our captain's log.
Of course. The Enterprise investigates the disappearance of a colony of Illyrians, a species that are banned by the Federation due to their genetic engineering. As an ion storm approaches, members of the away team beam back to the ship after contracting a virus that causes them to be addicted to light. Number 1 has to reveal that she is an Illyrian to explain why she is immune, and a cure is synthesized from her blood. Trapped in the storm, Pike and Spock determined that the colonists were attempting to reverse their genetic modifications so they could join the Federation, when they may have created the virus and transformed into plasma-like beings who protect the pair from the storm. Once everyone is cured, Pike and Spock return to the Enterprise, where Number 1 attempts to resign. Pike refuses, and Number 1 later wonders whether he would have shown more prejudice if she had not helped save the crew. She learns that the virus got through the ship's automatic filter because Chief Medical Officer Dr. Mabenga is using an outdated transporter to hold his sick daughter in stasis until he can cure her condition.
So this is a very interesting episode, I think, of Strange New Worlds, because it covered a lot of topics, including some controversial topics. But Hayley, I'm going to ask you, what was your first reaction after watching this episode?
That was, it was interesting. And I was trying to think back to the original series, because Number 1 was in the original series for a bit. And I was like, is Number 1 an Illyrian? Should I know this already? I don't know. Anyway, so that was kind of interesting, and it left a question over my head about Number 1. And then this was just really, it was a neat episode. I liked that, kind of both A and B plot tied together towards the end, which was wonderful. And again, learning more about our crew members, which is fantastic. And again, beautiful set designs, wonderful, just a wonderful episode.
I need one of those away mission jackets.
Yes, those jackets are nice. Yeah. I liked it. Mm-hmm.
The clothing is top notch on this show, without a question. I really liked what they did as far as the storyline with Number 1 and how they handled everything about it, because to me it was very much within Number 1's character, and it also kind of explains why Number 1 is the way she is sometimes, where she's striving for perfection because she's trying to kind of maybe hide herself because of her genetic modifications. But we also get some great moments with her in this. Rebecca Romaine Stamos has been phenomenal as this character since she took on the role in Discovery, and I've loved everything she's done here. I also like the fact we get a little bit more with what's going on with Dr. Manga. I know I always mispronounce that, and I apologize. Mabenga, yes, Mabenga.
Yes.
And I really think that's going to be a storyline that we're going to revisit several times before it's all said and done. Because his daughter is absolutely adorable.
Yes, definitely.
I also think that it's going to be very interesting, the relationship between Leon Noonan Singh and Una going forward. And I think that they are going to be. If you watch the Ready Room, they talk about the revelation of Una is going to play more into more episodes of Strange New Worlds. So I'm curious to see how that's going to play there. But I like the fact that, again, we have an episode where you kind of get the focus on a couple of people, but we still see some moments with other characters. We get some great moments with Hemmer in this episode as he's trying to fix or figure out certain things. And I again, I got to go back to what we talked about a little bit earlier. The engineering room is just the best looking engineering room of any Starfleet ship. I'm sorry. That was mind-blowingly well done.
It's an incredible looking set. I like how it's set up. Like, it seems to be set up perfectly. Like, here's, the warp core is way back over here. Like, it seems like that's where it should be. Rather than like in TNG, here's the warp core. It's right here, just on the
right
other
there.
side of this door. I like that. I love that aspect of, well, we have our workstations and they're here, but the warp core is way out that way because it would make sense that it should be farther out. I liked that Hemmer almost seemed to have got it. Like, he almost knew what was going on and knew what needed to happen. And, when he comes into sickbay and then he shuts off the lights, right? And it's just like, man, if only people would have listened to him a little bit more. Maybe he wouldn't have gotten affected and tried to bring part of the middle of the planet onto the ship.
And I find it interesting. He's blind and he was still infected by this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, vitamin D deficiency, it's not, you get that by being out in the sun and absorbing it. It's not so much I need to see the light. It's I need to feel it type thing. Yeah.
No, but I just think they handled it perfectly. And, every Star Trek series so far has always had a virus type episode. And this was the one for Strange New Worlds. And it was what I liked about it was fun because it wasn't necessarily like, oh my God, we're fighting against people weren't dying left and right, but how they tried to get light and through the different ways they tried to do it, I thought was very creative. You have Leon kind of endangering the crew with the warp core, trying, I'm going to get more light from this, but it ends up leading to the fact that because she was in contact with Una, the radiation, so they were able to create antibodies, yet other people trying to just smash lights out, the screens on lights so they could get it. Or, I mean, it just made it fun. And like I said, even though the focus of the story of both the A and the B plot, you had Una and the Doctor on the ship, and you had, of course, Spock and Pike on the planet. We still got some great moments with Nurse Chapel. We got some great moments with Leon. We still got a great Uhura moment as well. So they've done a very good job of getting the balance going, and I think that's really something I appreciate with this show as well. But I have some trivia on this episode. Kevin slacking on his security, so he wouldn't believe all the stuff that I've been able to sneak on the ship. It's great. But
nice.
A couple of fun Easter eggs on this episode as well. The episode was directed by Leslie Hope, who might be very familiar to several Star Trek fans. She played Kira Nerese's mother in Mother Kira. She played her mother, Kira Maru, in Star Trek Deep Space Nine episode Wrongs Darker Than Death or Night, which aired in 1998.
Interesting. I'm trying to remember. I'm like calling back the character, but it's been a while. But I think I remember who that was. Yes.
Yeah. And then I like this. I like this too. The buildings on a bridge over water that were depicted on Hemet 9 are real buildings over Lake Ontario in Toronto beside Budweiser's stage. So it's cool that they're incorporating real places that kind of have that look. And that's one of the things that I've liked about the show. I love where we're at, where it feels we've got this futuristic stuff going on, but things still feel like they're kind of based in a certain reality as well, Hayley.
Yeah, and that's part of why I've really enjoyed everything, because you can tell, sets, real sets and stuff like in the previous episode, that egg thing in the middle clearly was an actual prop, was real, and then the rest of it probably was, CGI'd in. But I like that they are relying on actual places and actual sets, because it lends that reality to it, even though we know it's not real. But it still lends that reality to that, which makes it really nice. One thing I wanted to say, this essentially was Strange New Worlds version of the Naked Time and the Naked Now, if you think about it.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. So yeah, and they did a phenomenal job with it, but that's also going to lead us into our away missions, because we've got a couple of them here. So I'm going to fire up that transporter. Yes, I can even be Chief Kyle. It actually is a real person now.
Woohoo!
Okay, Hayley. Mission 1, or as I call it, Blinded by the Light. There's a
I'm not
song
going
in
to
there
sing
somewhere.
it.
Yeah,
There
exactly.
is a song in there. I'm
So-
not. Nope. I
So
stopped
on this
myself.
on this episode, I think the big thing with this episode was we see where Starfleet hasn't fully evolved or much, because we see their own bias towards the Illyrians for their genetic modifications. But on the flip side of that coin too, we also see where we see certain Illyrians are so willing to go above and beyond to be able to join Starfleet. It feels like this is a case where there's no winners by the end of this episode, because you have Starfleet dealing with their bias, and obviously because of what happened with the eugenics war and everything like that. But then you have these Illyrians who are so willing to change themselves to become part of Starfleet instead of just accepting who they are. It's a really interesting message in this episode of Strange New Worlds, where it's almost conflicting with each other. And then obviously too, everything with Una finding out she's an Illyrian, that wonderful scene where she tries to give her resignation and Pike absolutely refuses and says, when it comes to Starfleet, I'll deal with that. But it felt weird, because it really did feel like at the end of the day, it's like, okay, it reflected a lot, I think, of what's going on right now. It doesn't feel like there's really any winners out of this episode. And how did you feel about this?
Well, and that's the interesting thing, because I mean, we have to look at and remember, this essentially is pre-TOS.
Yeah.
So post-discovery, pre-TOS, in the timeline of where we're at now with all the different shows. And so it would make sense that Starfleet would still be biased towards any kind of genetic modification, because we've gone through the eugenics wars, we've had Khan and the issues with the augments, and so being leery of anything like that, simply just because of the ramifications and disasters that can happen, is understandable still at this point. I know it was never really brought up in Discovery, was it?
No.
Yeah. So Discovery really kind of never addressed that. And so this is kind of our first look at everything before we actually see anything in TOS. And so, in the timeline of things, keeping that all straight is just really hard sometimes. But so it's kind of not surprising that there would still be that bias there. It is interesting that the Illyrians, would have their desire to change themselves and say, we want to be a part of Starfleet. So it would be interesting to know what their motivations were. Clearly, it had to have been something really, really powerful and strong for them to say, we're willing to try to essentially correct ourselves to be able to join Starfleet. And perhaps, maybe they had a great threat, or whether it was an external from an enemy, or whether it was internal and they were worried about, the destruction of their civilization, which, and in this case, at least from this planet, we learn later that, there were other planets with Illyrians on it, that obviously, we're still alive and thriving, because we have number one on the ship, and she came from that colony. And so I think that's the more interesting aspect of we never really understand what their motivations were for wanting to join Starfleet. It's just that they wanted to join Starfleet so much that they were willing to try to reverse what they had done to themselves. And, I can only imagine that a society that was able to genetically modify themselves would be able to genetically unmodify themselves. But I can imagine, a reverse process on a lot of different things is really difficult and generally not successful, because you lose so much in the process. I mean, if you're pulling out and plucking out genes, it's easy to pluck them out, but it's not easy to put them back. It's like you hem your pants to make them shorter, and then you realize you've done it too short, and you try to hem them back to be longer, and it just doesn't work.
Yeah, no. Once you go to a certain point, it's hard to turn back.
Mm-hmm.
One of the other things too, Hayley, that I see with this, and to me, it's maybe one of the most blatantly obvious times where we kind of see. I hate using this term, but I can't think of anything of the underbelly of Starfleet. The not so good parts of Starfleet. We've seen it in TNG with different moments. We've had it obviously with DS9 with some even decisions that Cisco made along the way. Obviously with Voyager, but we've always seen it in a Star Trek, but I've never seen it quite where it felt so blatant like it did in this episode, where it's just out there that, yeah, sorry, we have a bias against genetic modification. You can't be in Starfleet if you've been genetically modified. And I feel like this is something that has been kind of developing even with some of the other series, with Discovery and with Picard. Obviously, with the season finale of Picard, we had the big reveal of Soon holding up the con file. And obviously, we have Una being an Illyrian, and obviously the connections to Khan with Leon Noonan Singh on this show as well. So I'm curious to see if this genetic modifying and dealing with that is going to be something that's going to pop its head up more often during Strange New Worlds, because it feels like this is the place where they're really kind of going to put all those threads together a little bit.
That's a possibility. You bring up a good point of that. And I think it's interesting, though, because, again, Star Trek has always been a mirror to ourselves. And it's always good to address that darker side, the underbelly, as you call it, because if we don't address it, then it just sits there and it festers, and we can avoid the giant monkey in the room, but that doesn't really do anything for any progress. We can't move forward if we don't address the monkey in the room. And so I think addressing that is what leads to progress, which maybe leads to where we were at with season 1 of Picard, where we have, clones essentially, and whatnot. And so that can think for themselves and are, 10 steps above where Data was at, right? And so I think it's something that could very well come up. I'm hoping that it doesn't come up a ton, because then that can get a little too much, but I think it's definitely something that would be interesting to be addressed. Speaking of Khan, since you mentioned it, I totally called that was going to happen. When we were talking Picard earlier, I said, I bet you anything he's gonna be leading to the eugenics wars, and I called it.
Yep. There you go. Score 1 for the science officer. We'll give her extra time on the phaser banks.
Yes.
So let's get into away mission 2, Hayley, because for the first half of Strange New World, I'm at least calling this Getting to Know Your Crew. And I'm subtitling this Keeping Secrets, because we have a couple of major secrets get revealed from some crew members. Obviously, we've discussed it, Una being Illyrian, and of course the Doctor keeping his own secret, which ended up putting the entire ship at risk because of it, where he's keeping his daughter in an antiquated medical transport buffer, trying to basically save her life. And what I find so interesting about this is, in both cases, the secrets they're keeping are very personal secrets, but I don't think anybody can fault them for keeping those secrets either. So it's kind of one of these things where they have these secrets, but they're not necessarily the bad guy secrets, but it's just like, it's showing how much this crew still doesn't really know each other yet either.
Fair assumption. I mean, they were out together. We don't know how many of them outside of, number 1 and Captain Pike and Spock. And so to me, it felt like, aside from Cadet Uhura, who's new, and La'an, that most of the crew and Nurse Chapel, because we know she in the first episode that she's new to the ship as well. It seems like at least the 4, so Captain Pike, Spock, number 1, and M'Benga know each other. But just because we know somebody doesn't mean we know everything about them, and people can easily hide things. There was the one episode in TNG where we find out that the one crewman is part Romulan. And, he was able to get into Starfleet, and then he confesses and they promptly remove him because he's part Romulan, which just seems so ridiculous. But that's another episode. And so, it's not surprising that even knowing people as well as we think we do, there's still always something that we don't know.
Yeah.
And I think my biggest thing with this was why, if the main transporter is fully operational, it had the most recent update, why a medical bay transporter would have been an issue.
Because I don't think he has it fully connected to the system because of having his daughter in the buffer. And I think that was one of the things Hemmer kind of hinted at with like, oh, why that shouldn't affect the lights. And yet it did. And I think also in this aspect too, it was the fact that maybe I think part of it was because of all the power increases they had to do to get everybody beamed up from the ion storm. It might have affected things in a different way. But I find it very interesting because I think, one, we're getting to see a whole another side of the Doctor who we really are just getting to know. And obviously with the revelation of Una, and I go back to how it was handled by Pike at the end of the episode when she tries to turn herself in and he just absolutely refuses. And it just shows you the character of Pike yet again, as far as he's like, no, you have served me admirably. I have your back no matter what. And then I love that moment at the end where we have the Doctor reading to his daughter. And just, again, Hayley, I just feel like this is something we're going to be revisiting before the season is out.
Definitely. And because he says that the cure is out there, and that's the interesting thing too with this is we're so advanced at this point, but there's still things that we can't fix. And that's such an interesting idea because so much in Star Trek, oh, you have this, oh, we'll fix it, no problem. Oh, there's this, oh, we'll fix it, no problem. As far as, Starfleet and the planets that are in the Federation. And yeah, we encounter planets that don't have that capability, but it's never seen as part of the crew or their family that we can't fix it. We can't make them better. And so that concept is really quite fascinating that, she has cancer, a form of cancer that's not curable. And in this time frame, it's really quite fascinating.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's one of those things that kind of hits home with everybody because we've all had somebody affected by cancer, but it's always that much harder when it's a child. And I think it gives you a lot of empathy for the character as well. And you just see how his priority over everything else is he's a father, and he's a father trying to protect his child. And I think that's really heartwarming there well.
What if somehow Una comes into play with curing his daughter?
And that is a possibility.
That was something that my brain thought of at the end of the episode, was that maybe perhaps there's some genetic modification that can come into factor that number 1 has that would cure his daughter.
Yeah.
Through this, her coming forward about herself.
Yeah, I think there's a couple. These are both interesting storylines that are going to pop up again before the season is over. So I'm looking forward to seeing how they do that. But we're going to take a quick break, let you know what else is going on around the Fandom Podcast Network. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the Ready Room and see if we're going to continue honoring the famous Union Federation tradition. But first, we'll be right back because here's what else is happening on the Fandom Podcast Network.
Thank you for listening. We hope you're enjoying this podcast. We'd like to continue to feed your ears by inviting you to listen to these other great shows on the Fandom Podcast Network. It starts with our flagship show, Culture Clash, discussing the latest in entertainment pop culture. Bloody Kings, Immortals Take Notice, our show covering the entire Highlander universe. Couch Potato Theaters, where we celebrate our favorite movies. Time Warp, the Fandom Flashback podcast discussing a year in movies and our favorite retro movie and TV pop culture topics. Good Evening, discussing all things Alfred Hitchcock. Union Federation, our Star Trek and Orville show. Hair Metal, the 80s and early 90s rock metal podcast. Type 40, our show covering the time-traveling Doctor Who universe with host Dan Hadley. Lethal Mullet, an 80s and 90s action film podcast with host Adam P. O'Brien. Also check out the Lethal Mullet Network for more great podcasts. What a Piece of Junk, a Star Wars podcast with hosts Scott, Derek, and Nathan. Making Treks, a Star Trek podcast, a deep dive into the final frontier with host Mark Newbold and Adam P. O'Brien. And check out our newest shows, The Fandom Show, our monthly Fandom Podcast Network live YouTube exclusive show about the month's hottest topics in fandom, and the FPN True Believers MCU podcast, discussing the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the related Marvel television and streaming MCU universe, including the connections to the original Marvel comics. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on several platforms. Please subscribe to the Fandom Podcast Network YouTube channel to receive notifications of new podcast episodes and live events. You can enjoy all of the Fandom Podcast Network audio podcasts on our master feed at fpnet.podbean.com. The Fandom Podcast Network is on all major podcast platforms, including Apple Podcast and iTunes. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on Facebook. You can email us at fandompodcastnetwork@gmail.com. You can also find the Fandom Podcast Network on Instagram at Fandom Podcast Network and on Twitter at FanPod Network. Thank you for listening, and remember, respect others and enjoy your fandom.
And somehow Kevin, even on vacation, manages to get on every one of these shows. I don't know. So we have a time-honored tradition here at the Union Federation. I watched the Ready Room, Hayley. Are you keeping the tradition alive? Yeah, the joke.
Yeah, I know.
Always at least one person on every episode who hasn't watched the Ready Room. Are we keeping that tradition alive? So I'm going to
keeping that alive.
I am going to at least give you a little bit of rundown on what happened on the Ready Room. Was this week, Rebecca Romaine and executive producer, writer Akilah Cooper joined Will Wheaton to talk about episode 3, Ghost of Illyria. They discussed how the plight of the Illyrian colonists and Una's dilemma illustrate the importance of messages of prejudice within this episode. Romaine also recalls a prank Anson Mount played on her at the end of filming season 1, and we finally get a little bit of a refresher of how Leanne Ancestors Con kind of ties all this together as it's kind of your glue function here. And also a look back at the Enterprise's crew's first appearance on the original series. Now, one of the things I really liked about this episode is they did this whole the legacy of characters of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, where they talked about each character's history within Trek and how they're being portrayed in Strange New Worlds. And I thought it was very well done, especially with Uhura, especially talking about how important the character was, how even one of the things of her character was representing her original African heritage, which she talks about in episode 2. But Hayley, I think that's one of the things I've really enjoyed about this is that, like I said, it feels like they're doing a good job of paying homage to these classic characters, but letting us see them in a little bit of a new light as well, from a different perspective.
Definitely. And I really appreciate that. I love that. I mean, obviously we know what happens. Uhura stays in Starfleet, but it's nice to see this earlier version of herself, because what person, and we can postulate she's a cadet, so she's in her late 20s, probably somewhere in there, and isn't quite sure what she wants to do, and what 20-year-old really does know what they want to do with themselves. So I think that's perfectly plausible in her story, that she would be questioning it. And it is nice to see that. And again, I am just thoroughly happy with that we've got this show around this captain, and that I wanted to know more of.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think it's been so far just so very well done. The interview with Rebecca, I'm not going to spoil the joke because you need to go watch it for yourself.
Okay.
Stuff.
Okay.
However, I do want to say what I pulled out of that. Besides, obviously, the importance of the conversation they had, and they're always very good about having that pertinent conversation in the Ready Room. But just seeing Rebecca Romijn's honest excitement for playing this character, the joy she has of playing this character, and how important it is to her. And I mean, she's played some pretty important fandom characters throughout her career. Obviously, playing Mystique in the original X-Men films, things like that. So, but I want to go back to something that happened last week with Rebecca that I don't know if you caught on social media or not, involving her father-in-law.
No.
Her father-in-law happened to be found a big banner of his daughter-in-law down in a subway station in New York and proceeded to stand by it all day and tell fans that was his daughter-in-law. Of course, needless to say, and how proud she was that she was in Star Trek. Needless to say, by the end of the day, Rebecca Romijn's husband, who happens to be one Jerry O'Connell, who happens to be a key voice on Lower Decks and has his own ties to Star Trek, was like, wait a minute, I'm the first officer on a Starfleet ship too, Dad. So it was a lot of fun. It was also very cool that they had this segment kind of refreshing us on Khan and seeing that classic version of Khan that was played by Norman C. Lau so well. For those of you who don't know our good friend Norman, of course, who was one of the hosts of Mission Log, he recently cut his hair, but he had his hair and he was looking a lot very Khan-like, I must say.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
very true.
We love you, Norman, and shout out to all of our friends over at Mission Log as well. And of course, too, they gave us their typical Star Trek trivia and a little brief look at the next coming episode of Strange New Worlds, Memento Mori. But you know what, Hayley, I've got to ask too, just with Strange New Worlds and the impact it's having, because I know we've seen it all on social media. I don't see anybody who's talking negative about Strange New Worlds right now, and I think it's probably lived up and beyond to the hype. Do you think I'm mistaken there?
No, definitely not. I think that, there was a lot of people who were excited about this without even knowing a ton about it, and knowing that it was going to be Captain Pike. And I will say I was a little apprehensive with, Spock number one, like mostly Spock. I was like, okay, all right, okay. But then seeing it, it works and it's wonderful. But I think a lot of people were just excited with the little bit that we got of Captain Pike and number one and Spock in Discovery. And then knowing that this was going to be a return back to episodic television was exciting without knowing anything else.
Yeah.
I think it's so refreshing.
Yeah, I think for me, Hayley, one of the aspects I'm loving about it is the sense of exploration again.
Mm-hmm.
And I really feel like that's something we haven't had in either Picard or Discovery in a good while. Mainly Discovery, mainly because of just how they tell their stories in Discovery with the overarching thing. And with Picard, because the focus is on Picard and it's dealing with things that affected Picard. And I'm hoping maybe with season 3, with the returning of the original TNG crew, we're going to get some of that sense of exploration again. But this is everything I want out of my Star Trek. And what I think the biggest thing for me too, and I know we've talked about this on several episodes of Union Federation, is kind of the darkness that Star Trek has kind of fallen into with both Discovery and Picard. A lot heavier material, just a lot of weight to it. And this just feels fun and it feels hopeful. And I think that's something for me that I've really pulled out and why I'm enjoying this show so much.
I totally just thought of something. You're going to love this. Discovery and Picard are a nice, dense, rich New York style cheesecake. And Strange New Worlds is a nice, light, fluffy, strawberries with whipped cream angel food cake.
There you go. That's a good comparison. Either way, it's all tasty. It's just
yeah.
Well, that is going to wrap things up for this, because now I want dessert. So I'm just it's all your fault, Hayley. Wrap things up for this episode of the Union Federation. But before we get out of here, let's open up some subspace signals. And of course, this is the Union Federation episode 128. We covered Strange New Worlds episode 3, Ghosts of Illyria. There's a few ways to find this great show. First and foremost, you can find it on the Fandom Podcast Network on our master feed at fpn.podbean.com or fpnet.podbean.com. And of course, you can also now find it on the BQN, which is our great new partner where you can also, we are doing a little show sharing, Hayley, because not only can you find Union Federation on the BQN, you can now find Galaxy Class and just a couple other shows that we're working on getting over here on All Good Things, for instance, is now on the feed for the Fandom Podcast Network, and Galaxy Class is coming. In fact, I was just on the most recent episode of Galaxy Class where we do a Batlift battle going on, Hayley.
Nice. Well, as they say, more is better.
Yes, exactly. You cannot have enough Trek, but we're not only excited about Trek. We've got the Orville coming up. We talked about it at the top of the show, June 2nd, not that far away. I'm excited to get back. Have you seen the new trailer? Did you see the new trailer, Hayley?
Maybe. I don't remember. That's probably a no then.
Yeah, we're going to let you slide. If you go back to the notes to last week's episode on Basecamp, we have a link for it there. You can check that out. Of course, too, subscribe to the Fandom Podcast Network's channel on YouTube, where we've got videos of all our podcasts and try to do a few fun things around there. And of course, visit the Union Federation Facebook page, where you can find myself, Hayley, Amy, all of us trying to keep you updated on everything that's happening in Trek and the Orville. And of course, too, you can find the Union Federation in the Fandom Podcast Network and BQN on all your major podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts, iTunes. You can find the FPNet also on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Amazon, now on Amazon Podcasts as well. So very excited about that. You can email us at theunionfederation@gmail.com. You can find me, Kyle, on Twitter at AKyleW or on Instagram at AKyleFandom. Hayley, where can people find you on social media these days when you're feeling up to posting some things?
You can find me on Twitter. I'm at Trekkie01D.
And of course, you can find Kevin at Spartan_Phoenix on both Twitter and Instagram. It might be kind of lovey-dovey right now and wedding kind of stuff. He's still in that wedded bliss mode.
Disgusting.
I was gonna say, it's a little disgusting, but we're happy for him, and of course the First Lady of the Fandom Podcast Network, Miss Erin Gill. And two, you can find Amy on Twitter at Miss Amy Nelson, and of course all over the BQN network, because as we've discussed on Galaxy's Class, we decided that the N stands for Nelson.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
so
true.
And of course, there's a couple great ways to support the Union Federation podcast. You can go to our TeePublic store, search for Union Federation or any of your favorite shows on the Fandom Podcast Network. And we've got all the gear, whether you need a hoodie, a t-shirt, some stickers, a phone case. We got it all there. We even got some great pillows. If you look behind my shoulder on the YouTube video, you can see that hanging back there. And of course, we love reviews, especially on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, or whether it's on Spotify, Podbean, iHeartRadio. We just love the feedback in general, because as always, we're trying to strive and improve ourselves and make better podcasts to feed your ears. Now, before we leave, Hayley, we got to look into the Orb of Prophecy, because next week, episode 129 of the Union Federation, hopefully we'll have a little bit more crew involved. I might have to go knock some people out and drag them on board, or give us more light. It's more light, isn't it, Hayley? Is that really what it is? I need to turn up the lights brighter?
Maybe. I don't know, because then they might go a little bonkers, and I don't know about that.
Have you met Kevin and Amy?
Yes.
Yeah, lights on all the way up.
Yeah, but if we're talking about bringing aboard, bit of core of the planet, to attract them back, I think that would be overkill.
That's true. And I don't think our insurance covers that. So.
No, it doesn't.
Sorry, guys, not enough light for you, but hopefully that you will be back for next week's episode. If not, I know Kevin will be back, because he's going to take over the captain's chair when we hit the Orville. So that's going to be fun. But next week, we're also looking at episode 4 of Strange New Worlds, Memento Mori. It's nice that we're getting episode titles for Strange New Worlds in advance, and not like, oh, we have no clue.
Well, I mean, and that's hard because it's kind of a catch-22. I mean, it's great to know so that you can know, but then sometimes you're like, oh, that gives away too much of the story, and now I know it's coming, and I'd rather not know it's coming.
Well,
So,
I think the
you
description
know,
for this week's episode is pretty basic. Pike must find unconventional Starfleet methods to deal with a malevolent force that attacks the Enterprise. That's all I need to know.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
Pike doing his thing. We're all good. So,
yes.
but we are excited again. Next week we'll be here to cover Strange New World episode 4, and then following that is time not only to continue on the Voyages of Strange New Worlds, but the Orville New Horizons season 3 is here. We have waited a very long time for the Orville. We are excited to have it back. It's going to be a lot of fun, and can't wait to have all you Orville fans joining us for that as well. We are probably planning a live show for that Orville first episode. So,
Oh boy.
yeah, we got to keep you. We got to keep you while we got you furloughed from Medbank, Hayley.
Yes.
We got to keep you busy. So, thank you so much for joining me, Hayley. I'm glad you're on the mend and
Thank you.
back with us on the planet. At least the light beings are kind of starting to fade a little bit though. So hopefully this. But again, thank you to all of our wonderful listeners, both here on the Fandom Podcast Network and also on the BQN. Until next time, hailing frequencies are now closed.